Donald Trump, Jeffrey Epstein, and Rupert Murdoch. That's the threesome that America wants to hear about. Today, we're talking about Donald Trump's latest attack in his attempt to distract from the Epstein list and his failure to release it, or his attempts to hide the Epstein list by suing the Wall Street Journal and going after his old pal, who I guess he's had a falling out with, Rupert Murdoch. I'm Shant Karnikian. That's Brian Kabateck. This is Civil Action on the Legal AF Network. Brian, where do we start with this issue?
God, where do we start with this one, Shant? It's so good, and there's so much to share here. First of all, the President of the United States, and I can't find another mention of the President of the United States in recent history filing a lawsuit on his own behalf, files a lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal, which just, by the way, is owned by a guy named Rupert Murdoch, which also owns Fox, which is probably the reason why Donald Trump became president of the United States, is because of Fox. He ends up suing his buddy's paper for $10 billion in the Southern District of Florida. Let's just start with that on the table, and let me add this little icing on the cake. The lawsuit itself includes the following incredulous statement, and I'm going to read it for you word for word. He's describing himself in the lawsuit, and Trump says, plaintiff, President Donald J. Trump is a private citizen of the United States. No, he's not. He's probably the most public citizen in the world. And then it goes on to say he's a resident of Florida and is also the 45th and 47th president of the United States. I thought he was a resident of the White House.
I thought he's a private citizen and not the president of the United States. I mean, isn't the case captioned Donald J. Trump, President of the Donald J. Trump? Isn't that the caption of the case?
Correct.
Yeah.
President Donald J. Trump is the caption of this lawsuit.
That's so good.
So there's so much to talk about here, Shant, but why don't you first cover just the basics here?
Well, let's talk about the basics. So what happened? The Wall Street Journal ran a story where they revealed a report about a letter or some birthday message, a bawdy birthday message. That's a new word that I learned, by the way, and Brian made fun of me for this off air. Bawdy, which is something that's of
bawdy.
Well, anyway, so a bawdy message about Jeffrey Epstein. It involved apparently a naked woman. The photograph wasn't, or the drawing or painting or whatever work of art we're referring to here was not published by the Wall Street Journal, but they reported that that's a gift or message that our dear president sent to Jeffrey Epstein for one of his birthdays back in the day. And this is coming on the heels of the Trump MAGAverse just totally melting down and imploding on itself like a reverse black hole, or a reverse Big Bang. So maybe that's called a black hole. I don't know. I'm not an astrophysicist, but the Trump MAGAverse is just absolutely melting down about his failure to release the Epstein files, the Epstein list, something he campaigned on. His whole family and his whole inner circle campaigned on this, and he won't release it. So the Wall Street Journal runs this, adding insult to injury, further solidifying the connections between Trump on the one hand, Epstein on the other hand, and Trump just melts down. Within 24 hours, he files this lawsuit for, what is it, like $10 billion in damages, which is just...
Okay, but before we even get to this lawsuit, you have to understand that Murdoch and Trump have been friends for over 50 years. I mean, close social friends, including in Palm Beach, including in New York. Murdoch's paper, or Fox, is one of the first news organizations to report in the 90s that he might run for president. They've had a close relationship. They have a falling out in 2020 when Trump gets furious because Fox correctly reports that Biden won Arizona. And then Murdoch later blames Trump's false claims of election fraud for the reason why his anchors went after Dominion and ends up being
got sued for that. Yeah,
$700 million. Okay. So then they make up, because they end up making up in 2024. Fox has a number of town halls for Trump. And then in February, after he's elected and sworn in as president, Trump has Murdoch to the White House and refers to him as something like an amazing guy, a wonderful guy, a legend, some words like that.
Yeah.
So everything's good and fine in Trump and Murdoch land, right, Shant?
Well, not anymore. Not anymore. Apparently, they. I think it's safe to say this is a love-hate bromance that they've had together. So 24 hours after that report of Donald Trump writing that letter to Jeffrey Epstein, Trump just loses his shit and files this lawsuit. And he's asking for $10 billion for defamation. He files it in Florida, right? Because that's probably a favorable, he sees it as a favorable jurisdiction for him. He doesn't file it somewhere like California, where we have strong laws that prevent lawsuits like this, that you can strike down lawsuits like this. And we'll talk about that.
Or New York, where the Wall Street Journal is based.
Yeah, that's right. So he files it in Florida because apparently he's a resident there, even though he's a resident of the White House in Washington, D.C. And he's asking for $10 billion, astronomically high number, a bullshit number, if you ask me, because you'd have to prove, I don't know how one would prove that $10 billion in damages are associated with this type of reporting, even if it was
his
an utter lie.
reputation, Shant, $10 billion of damage to his reputation. It isn't everything else that's damaged his reputation. It's the story. Now let's unpack this as the legal scholars that we'd like to be, right?
Sure.
So first of all, there's a little thing in the United States Constitution called the First Amendment.
What's that? Is that the one about the guns?
It comes before the Second Amendment.
Before the guns.
Right. And it's called basically freedom of the press. But the analysis doesn't end there, because there's a famous case that deals with famous people, public people, people who are in the public eye.
That's right. That's a case called New York Times versus Sullivan. It's a landmark U.S. Supreme Court case. And that involved a defamation lawsuit as well. And can you tell us how that shook out, Brian?
Well, it ended well for the New York Times. Basically, the rule is that if you are a public citizen, and there's all kinds of definitions of a public citizen, but let me assure you, we don't have to go into law school to figure out that the president of the United States is a public citizen. The standard is very high for defamation.
Well, I was going to say, when you were first reading off like how he describes himself as, a private citizen residing in Florida, there's a deliberate reason why they allege that, because it makes it a little bit harder, right? If it's a matter of public interest.
He refers to himself as the president of the United States.
I know.
I mean, it's ludicrous. So the standard is actual malice. And what does actual malice mean? It means actually intended. You made up facts and you intended them to hurt the individual. And here, all a reporter has to be able to say is we had a reliable source.
Yeah, that's all. I mean, the standard is I think pretty high for Trump to meet, and I don't think he can meet it. I think this is would you say this is a loser of a case, Ryan?
Well, it's a case I wouldn't take on a contingency. Let me put it that way. Let me also put it this way. I would never represent Donald Trump. Now, be that as it may, it's almost an impossible standard. But even if it wasn't an impossible standard, what they're basically talking about is Trump's, penchant for sexually abusing or sexually harassing people. We already know that's a fact. So right there, he's got a problem. And even if you didn't have the First Amendment, and even if you didn't have New York Times versus Sullivan, one of the most famous First Amendment cases ever out of the Supreme Court, you would have Florida's own statute, which prohibits this kind of lawsuit.
Yeah, it's called the anti-SLAPP statute. Many states have it. It's the anti-SLAPP, SLAPP stands for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. And it's the anti-SLAPP lawsuit. It's an anti-SLAPP motion. It's the anti-SLAPP law. It's law designed to prevent people like Donald Trump from trying to stifle the voice of journalists, trying to quash the First Amendment, trying to stop people from talking, trying to stop people from exercising a right they have under the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights.
Can I use it to get you to stop talking sometimes?
Okay, go ahead. What do you want to say?
I'm kidding. Actually, I just want to give my final thoughts on this. First of all, this lawsuit should be dead on arrival. There's no question about it. But there's a couple things to remember. Trump has been successful with Paramount and CBS, who should have filed a similar motion to throw that lawsuit out. And instead, he ended up with $16 million settlement, which I have no evidence that a president has ever settled a civil case while he's been in office in the past. Trump also sued ABC and got a settlement out of them. So to some extent, he's emboldened by this. But I think what you said earlier, Sean, is probably the most accurate. This is part of the overall Trump strategy on Epstein. There's something there. There's something going on. I've said it before. The country has bigger problems than Epstein, but this has become a huge problem for the MAGAverse. It's become a huge problem for Trump. Democrats, he's now blaming Democrats for this. So I think this lawsuit was, if nothing else, an attempt to deflect some attention. And the final thing I will note, and this is absolute breaking news, is that I just found out about 15 minutes ago that Trump has barred the Wall Street Journal from the press pool on his next trip, which is to Scotland. So he's prohibited them from coming.
Yeah, I mean, he's just a bully. He's just a bully. This is bullying tactics. But at the same time, I think it's a two-pronged approach. One of them is just him being a bully, trying to stifle the voices of the media, of anyone, any opposition, any sort of political opposition, journalists, anyone like that. But at the same time, it's also a sideshow. It's a diversion tactic. It's a smokescreen meant to distract from this, because this is a critical issue for him. The MAGAverse, his supporters, everyone around him, his base, is starting to collapse with this Epstein thing, because this was such a fundamental component. Drain the swamp, go in there and expose the crooked Democrats and expose the elites and the liberal elites and how they're all pedophiles. And the whole thing's falling apart. In fact, he's not just, failing to deliver on a promise he made. The whole thing's coming back and pointing at him. So he needs to do this. He needs to throw little smoke screens everywhere and distract people. And I don't think it's going to work. I think people see through this. It looks like a desperate ploy. And I don't think his supporters are going to fall for this. I think they're better than that. I'm Shant Karnikian. That's Brian Kabateck. This is Civil Action on Legal AF. If you get a chance, subscribe to us so you can hear more from us, so you can hear from us every time we drop one of these episodes. And thanks for tuning in, everyone. See you next time.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.